Welcome to the FounderVideo podcast, an interview series bringing you the latest and greatest info on B2B marketing, revenue operations, and go-to-market strategy from respected experts. Here is your host, Will Martin.
All right, so we're here for the 25th episode of the FounderVideo podcast. Today we have with us Tom Hunt, founder and CEO of Fame, the company behind some of the well-recognized B2B podcasts in the industry. Thank you for coming.
I like most. Yeah, thanks, Will. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, same with me. I'm really happy for you to be here. I wanted to mention also that we're here because this is the 25th episode specifically. Because when I first outreached to you, you told me that, hey, I love the show, but let's wait until we have 50 episodes, which I appreciate. I think I get that, you probably get a lot of requests and whatnot, and you want to hop on the pods that are serious about it, right? Because now everyone and their mother is starting one, and if you're not going to be serious about it, then what's the point of hopping in? But then I got intro to thanks to Sam Dunning. Shout out to him, by the way. And he told me that we can take it down to half, right? Because we were almost to the 25th. So yeah, thanks for being here. And the first question that I wanted to ask you is, when I first stumbled upon your profile, there was one thing that stood out for me, and it was your headline. And it is the same now, right? 3.8 million ARR, $0 raised. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? Can you tie this to kind of like the question that I always ask at the beginning, which is who you are and what you do and what should people know about your past to understand what you're doing today, in a way that serves as a proper intro for why people should listen to you?
I think there's three things going on in that tagline. First, it's like 3.8 million ARR. Basically, that's only a result of 10 years now of trying to build small online businesses. Started trying in 2013, 14. First one with a male leggings company where we sold male leggings through e-commerce. Now it's big, but it wasn't big back then. And then there's probably like a wasteland of 17 other things I tried, and this is the best one. Fame. It's essentially a tech-enabled service for B2B companies where we help them start and grow podcasts. So it's taken us 5 years to get to 3.8 million in ARR. That's dollars. So I put that in there for credibility. That's the first part. Second part is the bootstrap thing, which I historically have raised, I think, £17,500. That's the total amount I've raised in my career. And so I got rejected by the VC world when we were trying to raise money for that company. It was back in 2016 or 17. And actually it was good that we didn't, because it didn't work out. I mean, maybe it would have worked out if we raised the money, but probably not. And so I'm like a bootstrapper really for necessity, because I wasn't born with loads of cash and I'm not that good at raising money. So that's why I put bootstrapped in there, or zero raised, which is true. Fame, I think we had the first payment from a customer into the bank account before I put any money in. So we've actually never had to take any money from anybody. And the final part is I don't know what I'm doing, which is it's almost a little bit like purposefully, I don't know, trying to get attention, because it is true. Like every day, now running a company of 70 people, I've never done that before. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I obviously have some level of competence to get here. But it is true in that I don't think anyone really knows what they're doing and everyone's making it up. But it's a little bit edgy, just to get the attention. I think that basically what I'm trying to do there is LinkedIn, trying to improve the conversion rate of the profile view to someone following me. And it's not a scientific test, but I think my conversion rate is quite good.
It is a good one. I would assume that it is good, because it is a good strategy. There's a lot of tweaks that you can make to optimize that conversion rate between profile view to follower. It's not easy at all. And, the headline is one of those. And I think you did a great job there. I think, again, that humility, sure, there's, of course, everybody that reads first 3.8 million ARR knows that there's some level of competence in that, just in that statement, right? But mixing it in with that humility of, hey, I'm just a human like you, and I have no idea what I'm doing because it's the first time I'm running a 70-person company, just like many other founders, right? And that, I think, it's really smart. Let's step into kind of to better understand as well how you end up building Fame as the kind of you mentioned it in your experiences as the first thing that worked out pretty well. But there's a lot of learnings that come behind that to make that work so well, right? And one of those that stood out for me, because this is something that is common among a lot of the people that I follow and look up to on LinkedIn, is the background in either management consulting or some other firm, corporate company that kind of deals with clients, has culture, has robust structure because there's a lot of layers, et cetera, et cetera. And, apart from all of the arguments that most people make when they become an entrepreneur, like, the liberty, the freedom, the control, the building something that you get to define how it is built, right? I want you to describe specific scenarios of what you took away from your experience in management consulting and, or, from working a job just in general, and the good and the bad. What pissed you off the most to then pivot into being an entrepreneur?
The good was like the basic skills that's super important, in my opinion, which is running a meeting or writing an email, learning how to present, learning how to recruit. And so these businesses are like the best training ground for this because they're like really big, established people business services companies that have to be good at that stuff. And so that for sure has been the best thing that I got out of it. The most annoying parts was probably just like being told what to do. And I know like that has to happen because I didn't know anything then. Maybe after 2 years, I started to know stuff, and maybe I actually did have the right idea, but was told not to do it. But that was definitely the rarity. So the challenge, and it's not exclusive to these large consulting companies, it's exclusive to being an employee. That I don't like being told what to do. So this meant I was forced to leave and try and build something for myself.
Yeah, I always think backtracking that, I got a lot of that intangible, the basic skills, because my first real experience is building the agency, right? And so you don't get that in uni or in school, like those basic skills of how to run a meeting, how to write an email, how to all that kind of stuff. It's, I think, really important, and I think it's a pattern. Like most of the most successful entrepreneurs that have built distribution as easily apparently as it can look with this day and age, a lot of them have that kind of background that built out the foundation that I'm sure it's now becoming a lot more useful as you scale fame, right? And build those robust processes and structures. Can you tap a little bit into that? Like, especially now, 70-person company, I'm sure you've had to make some tough decisions on the way, right?
Yeah, before I get into that, the experience that I wish I had that I think is one step better than consulting is finance, because you're still in a really big people company. So you learn how to do emails, meetings. The talent density is probably higher because it's higher salary, it's harder to get into those roles. But then you also learn the numbers stuff. And that is super important if you get past the early stage of a company. Like this year we bought 2 smaller companies, and I've had to like go and buy a course on how you value companies, how you negotiate deals. But if I had that 4 years experience, it would have just been much more seamless, In terms of
Yeah, before we go into the other question though, because I had this other question saved for later, but let's step into it because it's segueing perfectly. Part of what I said about, the people that I look up to on LinkedIn, whatever, it's not only the management consulting background, it's the IB, M&A, VC background too. And it's just what you said, right? I rather had the experience not in management consulting, but in finance, because you don't only get the basic skills of like writing an email, whatever, but also the understanding of enterprise value and how to exit a company and, I guess the scientific side of building a company in a way, right? What do you think is, I think this is a common pattern, and I'd like to know your take on what kind of intangible do you think this gives to entrepreneurs in general that then go on to build their own venture, that many, like the rest of working a job, don't give you. Like I think being a head of marketing at a B2B SaaS company doesn't prepare you as well as it could, working in IB, for example, or having a background in M&A or in a big professional services firm or something related to finance. It gives you a different intangible that then gets reflected into how you build the company. What do you think that is about?
I think in finance, you look at companies like products. Whereas if you're head of marketing, you're not outside the company, you're inside the company. And so the advantage that finance people have is they can step away outside of the business, and then they can mold the business into the thing that's valuable to sell itself, not just the product within it. A good example of this is when Elon Musk described building one of their Tesla gigafactories. He was saying that the product's not the car, the product's the factory. And so it's like, product number 1 is the actual thing you make. Product number 2 is like the factory within the business. And then there's a business itself is also a product. And so finance people, I think, get that perspective of the business being the product.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great mental model to think about it. Now onto the learnings, scaling fame from management consulting.
What did I take away? I think when I joined Accenture, they were very hardcore on like instilling the values of Accenture into us as we joined. I mean, let's see how hardcore they were by how many I can remember. The one I remember, I think the only one I remember is stewardship. Did you try to leave this company in a better place than when you found it? So I got 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 in terms of what I remembered, which is pretty good. That was 10 years ago. So anyway, I thought the values were bullshit when I joined. I was like, this sounds ridiculous. But then what they did very well was that in order to get promoted or paid more, you had to show how you exhibited behaviors due to these values. And then I didn't get to this stage, but if you presumably went on to performance management, it would be because you're not living up to these values. And so that was a big learning for us since day one. Like, as we hired our first person, we've had these values. And now when we hire people, we're scanning them on the values. We give what's called values awards. That was directly stolen from EY, actually, where if you see somebody doing something in alignment with the values, anybody can give anyone a values award, which is basically a little financial bonus. So we hire, we manage performance, and then we also, when people move through the performance management process, we also look at, are they behaving in alignment with the values? So that was one thing that I thought was bullshit initially that is like so important. Like when you have so many people, the only way you can grow is that if you make clients happier than somebody else, the competitor. And in a people business, the only way you can make clients happy is by have your people behave in a certain way. And so the only way you can have your people behave in a certain way is by constructing the system which incentivizes the right behaviors. And values, I think, is the most important tool to do that.
Totally. What were the values that you hated the most from Accenture, and you know, how does that line up with the kind of the values that you are now instilling into the Fames culture?
Let's get the Accenture values. So there's actually 6. I only remembered one, which is stewardship. Now, the first one, which is actually very similar to Fames, is client value creation. So we call that client, but it's essentially the same thing. The rest of them do sound like bullshit, you know, like one global network, respect for the individual, best people, integrity, like completely bullshit values, to be honest. But it was less about what they said the values were and more about how they like it really was.
Right.
You really were not forced, but incentivized to live by them.
That's interesting. Really interesting. Now, onto the sauce. Like, let's get into the sauce, the B2B podcast, marketing, whatever, the trenches, right? The first question that I have for you, because now it seems like any company should be starting a podcast, and I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the case. And maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, but how do you determine if a B2B company should be starting a podcast? Like, what does Fame look at when qualifying prospects? What are the parameters, you know?
Do they have a heartbeat? No, I'm joking. We should a company start podcast. I think it's like a sliding scale, and on the side of yes, they definitely should, is the specificity of their ideal customer. So the ideal client, if we see someone come inbound and they're like a cybersecurity governance software platform, then, and the ideal customer is like this mid-level compliance manager at companies with over 1,000 employees, absolute ideal to start a podcast. But if we have a customer come in that's like email productivity software, their ACV is like $1,000, their ideal customer is somebody that wants to get better at productivity. Not like, we probably, if they wanted to do it, we probably would do it, you know, but so we're like not as excited about that, because we think that growth program for the cybersecurity compliance company is just going to be much more profitable for them. And therefore for us, if we can make the client more money, then we're going to make more money. So I would say the number one thing is like, how specific is their customer persona and how niche is their offering?
The more niche, the more it makes sense to start a podcast, you'd say?
So the more niche offering, the more specific the customer persona, the more it makes sense to start a podcast for a B2B company.
Interesting. Good principles. What are the things you look at?
How like specific is their product and how specific is their customer persona?
That's it.
Oh, well, so that's like whether it's good for a company to start a podcast. For them to work with us, we want over 50 employees and we want for them to be B2B. Those are the two clear guidelines.
Okay, interesting. And from all of the, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of prospects go on and start the podcast themselves in-house or whatever, and you've worked with many companies building their podcast. So let's get into some actionable advice to all B2B companies that know that they need to, be starting a podcast because they meet those criteria, and they know it's for them, and they're excited about it, whatever. What do you see that a lot of them are getting wrong, and that they easily, especially that they easily could get it right if they knew about it, because they don't know what they don't know, right? So what have you identified that it's something that most people miss, and it's not that easy to not miss? It's not that hard. Yeah,
three key failure factors. They're quite simple when you understand them. So the first is getting the positioning right. Now, the positioning of a show can be broken down into two areas, what we call the niche and then what we call the edge. So I'll just give a quick example. My show is called Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur. So the niche there is very clear, B2B entrepreneurship. The edge is also very clear, which is the confessions piece. You're trying to get guests to share stuff they wouldn't normally share. And so right from just by seeing the name of the show, the positioning of the show is clear. And so really what we're pushing clients to do is we want their niche to be as narrow as possible at the start. It doesn't matter if you sell to more people. We just want, it's much easier to find those listeners if we can be very specific about the topic that we're going after. And then we coach them on having the edge as something like compelling, something that a listener would tell their friends about is the best definition of that. So just coming in and being like, we're going to interview this type of person about everything is like the opposite of good positioning. Coming in and being like, we're going to cover this very specific topic, and then we're going to have this thing that's different about us than other competing shows. That would be good positioning. So that's number one. Any questions?
I don't know. I'm just measuring this criteria against my own podcast, so I'm thinking whether I have the right positioning or not.
Let's go. How would you describe the niche of this show?
Go to market, mostly. Go to market and founder branding, B2B growth. You could put it in that bucket, I guess.
Yeah. And we're on episode 25. No, I'm joking. It's good. So it's like growth. It's like B2B growth and founder branding. Yeah.
Yes.
So I would have been, maybe we're okay now on episode 25, but it might have been easier to find those early listeners if we just chose something more specific than B2B growth. I think founder branding is probably about right, like in terms of an initial niche. It's always easier to broaden out later once you have those loyal listeners.
And that's the specific thing that I try to embed in most podcasts. It's like touching on everything that other shows could touch on to related to go-to-market and B2B growth and whatnot. But that's why it's called FounderVideo Podcast. The story about the founder and how they grow through video. And most of the people that I've interviewed is the case. So, yeah.
Got it. So, well, you're actually saying the positioning of the show was founders using video to grow the company, which is that's a great niche.
Exactly. Yeah. Whether it is through the founder himself or through, just as the company. Yeah.
But I haven't really used video to grow, so I don't fit into the positioning, right?
Well, yeah, because you helped your clients grow through video, because the podcast involves video. Yeah. Anyway, and at the end of the day, it's video, but it's content, right? Like video is just the format. So yeah, whatever. Keep going.
So I think if we were hardcore about having the content about founders that have grown their company with video, whether it's them producing the video or the company growing the video, I think that niche would have been banging.
This podcast is brought to you by FounderVideo. We'll cut your LinkedIn ads costs by at least 50% with natural-looking creatives that prospects actually want to consume. Just have an expert in your C-suite show up to a 90-minute interview once a month and let us take care of the rest. Turn LinkedIn ads from an accepted line item expense into a scalable revenue channel that fits into your go-to-market strategy. Book a free consultation at foundervideo.io.
Anyway, let's move on to the edge. So edge, the best way to describe this is the thing a listener would tell their friends about. Have you thought about that? Like, do you think the show has an edge?
Yeah, I think so. I actually had good feedback from in-house marketers and just our kind of ICP that, listens to the show and then can action on some of the advice that we've given, because it's meant for them to start getting or testing the waters or getting their feet wet with some of the playbooks that we implement for clients. So, yeah.
So saying the edge is like actionable strategies.
Yeah.
And that's how, like, your ideal listener, they would describe the show. Hey, have you heard of this podcast called FounderVideo? I learned loads of stuff that I've implemented.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So we've got niche. The ideal one would have been founders that grow their business with video. And then the edge is actionable strategies. That's how I would position the show earlier on. So second thing that people get wrong is not being strategic about guests. So to explain this, I'll explain how Fame started as well, because I think we might be going on to that anyway. So in 2018, I had a break from being an entrepreneur because I ran out of money, and I was head of marketing in a B2B SaaS company called Ebster. I joined. We decided there was this new customer persona to target. It was a sales operations person, because we sold revenue intelligence software. Sales ops people, they do ops for sales teams. And so we started this show, and it was me interviewing sales ops people. And after like 10 episodes, it was good. We had these, turned out to be quite good customer personas, like coming into our office to be interviewed. They were sharing on LinkedIn. There was a bit of buzz around the show, so the business was generally happy. But then we interviewed the VP of sales ops at a SaaS company that everyone knows. They came on the show, and actually randomly our CEO got chatting to them on LinkedIn. And then 6 months later, find a deal that was worth 10,000 or 10x more than the amount we spent on the show. And so what that meant was the business now loves the podcast. They reinvested more cash. We were releasing 2 episodes a week. And we actually grew an audience of sales ops people that were starting to know, like, and trust us. So when they were in the buying window for revenue intelligence software, they would come to us. And so this is why we like to be strategic about guests, because in the short term, the ROI is more likely to come from somebody that you've built the relationship with from the guest side, whether that they become a customer or a partner. Just today, we had a client that came to Fame. When they signed up to us, they said community and how they heard about us. Like, thanks, guys, completely useless. I shouldn't say that, actually. And then we emailed them today after they signed, being like, what did you mean about community? And the guy was like, there was somebody in my group, in my mastermind group, who I asked about, they don't know, a podcast agency, and they said Fame. And that person was a guest on my show 2 months ago. So you see how like we got the ROI through that. So the second point then is
interesting. Now I should have prefaced this episode with, this is the 25th episode, and I'm going to get taught what I've done wrong in the first year to do it right in the second one. But yeah, keep going.
So that's the thing, like ROI from a show in the first 6 months is more likely to come from the guest side than the listener side. And to get the ROI from the listener side, you have to really create content as per the strategy we talked about earlier, the positioning, for a year, probably. And so the only way you're going to be motivated, if it's just you doing it, the only way you're going to be motivated, if you're doing it in a larger company, the only way you're going to convince the CFO or CEO to let you do it for a year is if you show ROI early on in the first year. So strategic about guests. And then the third one is kind of connected to what I just said. It's just being consistent, like picking the release cadence that you think you can release for a year and hitting that no matter what. So it could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly. Anything less than that is harder to grow, but it's still fine. But you could do monthly if you wanted to. So getting the positioning right, being strategic about guests, and then being consistent.
Love that. Yeah, I'm proud that we kept it consistent. It was really scattered, and the schedule was not streamlined. But hey, 25 episodes, or 26th actually, that I recorded the 26th a couple of days ago. So 52 weeks, 26 episodes. It's bi-weekly, what we aimed for. So yeah. On the right track on that note, on that end. Then the edge and the strategy might need a couple of rethinkings, but yeah, the strategic about guests though, it's something that I think I've done somewhat well, and it's a great point, because you cannot get ROI from the listening side. That's such a great point, and nobody understands this when they start a podcast. Everyone starts thinking about how they're going to get ROI from the listening side, and like, how do we put ads to get the pod to be listened in the first 6 months? Well, it's not going to, like, that's not how it works. Like, you start with the strategic guest that gives the, creates some hype around to the show in a way, because it starts getting into dark social conversations, etc. And then that gets you the listening side that then after the first year starts to drive that ROI, right? Like, am I getting this right? Yeah.
For sure. Like, the absolute sweet spot for a B2B show in my eyes, between 5,000 and 10,000 downloads a month in a very specific niche, monetizing, let's say 30% from sponsors. Once you have 5,000 to 10,000 downloads and you're specific enough, it's relatively easy to get sponsors. So 30% sponsors, 30% on listener ROI. And all that means is you just have a compelling CTA that you insert into the start and end of every episode. And then 30% the remaining from the guest side. And I think the best way to get ROI from the guest side actually isn't by interviewing customers. It's by interviewing potential partners, building the relationship, and then bringing them on to be a referral partner. 2 ways, so you also refer their partnership. So I think that's a sweet spot, but it's quite hard to get there. to 5-10K download a month. So you need to focus on the guest side ROI in the short term.
Super interesting. Validating a lot of what I've kind of like subconsciously been doing, because you didn't know, I mean, nobody teaches you how to, when you start, I'm just the kind of guy that starts things and then learns on the way, of course, right? It's most people. But would you say that running a podcast for a B2B company, what affects differently or equally, whether they're a product or service company, and how does that differ? My take is that it might, benefit more services companies if you make the argument that services need more trust than product. But in my view, especially, in the next 5-10 years, I think the line between services and product, given the commodification in a way of software with AI, workforce is less, barrier of entry for building product is less too. Services companies and product companies are becoming more and more similar by the minute, I think. So what's your take on that, though?
Yeah, like the dirty secret of every big SaaS company is they have a big chunk of revenue from services. And then any good service company, especially now with AI, should be spending money on Zapier, AWS, etc. So they're blurring. I don't think services SaaS is, or product, if you put it, there's any like better way for like a podcast is better for either of them. I don't think so. The thing that I think is more important is how specific they are, e.g. how specific their customer persona is, and how high their ACV is, e.g. the higher the better, especially in the short term, because as I gave that example for my old company, is that we had one deal in the first 20 guests and it paid for the podcast 10 times over. So it's because the ACV was high compared to our cost. So I think it's less about service or product and more about specificity and ACV.
The more specific, and also it goes hand in hand, because the most niche things also, like there's a lot of niche things that usually have high ACVs too. So makes a lot of sense. How do you see risk playing in this kind of like debate? Also, like the less specific and the ACV, the more risky it is to start the pod then, because it also ties back into cost, right? Because the less specific and the less the ACV, the higher, like the tighter the difference between cost and ROI that you can drive, basically.
Yeah, the lower chance of ROI, and therefore lower chance of you making the money back that you spend.
Right.
You have to, like as we said, we have to do it for a year basically to get to that sweet spot, to get revenue from sponsorship, listeners, and guests. And so, depending on how you do it, it could cost anywhere, like just in-house, depending if you incorporating the time of the host, but let's do that. Like the host has to be somebody who's like relatively expensive. So if you incorporate the cost of the host at $500 an hour, and you only need them to bi-weekly show, so you only need them for 2 hours a month, for $1,000. In-house, let's just say it's going to be like $3,000. So $4,000 in total. It's going to be 50 grand doing it in-house. And actually comparable to doing it like we charge for a bi-weekly show, like about the same as that, maybe a bit less. So let's just say it's going to be 50 grand. So that's what you're signing up for. And so the risk is if you don't have those things, then we're less likely to, or more likely to lose that money.
Well, our podcast, I can tell you, costs way less than that because it's mostly my time. So,
well, what's your prospective hourly rate?
Right, that's a good question, right? It depends on how you measure the hourly rate. If you do the math, then it can be pretty expensive, but it's a great investment at the end of the day, also because it's not only it drives the entire. And let me ask you about that. I didn't have this put in the questions, but I'm curious because a lot of the reasons why most people want to start a podcast too, and how it's been sold or how's the demand being created for a podcast or B2B companies is also because it's the starting point for a content engine, right? And Chris Walker has talked a lot about this, right? Like how do you make the pod and Chris Walker and many other people, right? Like it's a thing now. And do you guys do any of that or consult on any of that on how to make that podcast drive more output throughout the company's content engine, whether it is for, I don't know, maybe even sales enablement use cases or mainly marketing, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, the way we sell the service is not as a podcast. It's more of it's like a marketing campaign that can impact like 5 different areas of your marketing function. And so let's just run through them. So we have SEO because, again, here's like the seed of the content, and we're going to get a keyword optimized web page for every episode. It's partners, because we're building relationships with people. It's sales enablement, because we don't want to go too far down the funnel, but we can produce episodes that would help salespeople in conversations. It's social, because we put out the video clips, etc., and use that the guests will share to improve social engagement. And that's probably the ones that are going to mind. But basically, it's a marketing campaign that can impact those 4 areas of your marketing function. And so when we're doing the ROI calculation, it's quite hard, but we do want to try and see if this YouTube short, for example, if we're tracking the links, drove X amount of clicks to the site and we got 1 demo from it. So all of that should go back into the calculation for the ROI of the show.
Interesting. Tips on, and go as deep as you want here, because I think this would be really, this would be the edge of my edge of this episode, right in a way, for the show, which is the how to make that process efficient, the streamlining it, governance over these stages, like who does what for, because we talk a lot about governance and processes and stuff when it comes to sales or product and whatnot, because it's seen as a more material and important thing for the company. But when it comes to marketing, there's not that much conversation about it, I think. So, in that process of making the podcast be a marketing campaign that can impact those four pieces, how do you guys approach the entire engine in that way? Do you have like a specialist for each part, or is someone owning, and why? Like what parts of the process?
So if I was doing it in-house, I think I would have 3 to 4 roles. The first role is the host and thought leader. So the person who's hosting the show is the person we want to make famous. And it's the person who is the expert in the topic. And so the role of this person is screening guests, ideally not doing the outreach, but just choosing who comes on. It's hosting the episodes. And then it's also a very key part that I think a lot of people overlook is like in the content repurposing process. It only works if we really get we pull out the right video clip, we have the right title of the episode, etc. And so they have to be involved in that stage, whether it's just selecting, like the next role will propose 7 clips and you choose 2 that work. They propose 3 possible titles and you choose the one that works. So I think the thought leader has to be involved in that. Otherwise, the whole repurposing process doesn't work. So that's the first role. Second role, I'll call it a project manager. This person is responsible for the show as a whole, e.g. episodes going out on time. Depending on like how much work this person has or how frequent the show is, they could also be responsible for guest recruitment. So they work closely with the host and thought leader to understand the ideal guest. They build lists, they do the outreach, and then the thought leader will approve. So they're responsible for finding guests, ensuring everything goes out on time, and then coordinating the other 1 or 2 resources. So we probably need an audio video editor, and then we probably need someone who can manage the written assets. And so again, the thought leader could jump in and do the audio video editing, or they could also do the written assets. But I think the optimal solution is to create a resources doing those. So the project manager manages them. So the audio video editor, ideally the same person, can do the audio, long form video, and the snippets or the clips. And then we have the written, or the writer, who is going to produce the written assets for the social posts, and also the written assets for the show, e.g. the title, description, and the blog post if we're going to produce that as well. So that is the resource setup that I'd recommend for someone running a show in-house. In terms of the systems and processes, a big chunk of this can be automated, e.g. when a guest books in, that can create the task within the project management software for the whole rest of the episode, e.g. the video editing, the audio editing, the asking the guest to share as the episode is released, for example. So it's just having a communication system, let's say Slack, the asset storage system, let's say Google Drive, and then a task management process, let's say Trello. And so that is all tied together with, let's say, Zapier to manage all the tasks, etc., and ensure everything's uploaded in the right time, etc. So that's how I run a show in-house if I was doing it.
In less than 5 minutes. Amazing. You're going through questions really quickly. I like that, because that way we can get deeper in more stuff. I would like to ask you, because I think this is a part where a lot of people, and including myself, I'm guilty of this as well, because subconsciously you just do it. You think you have the positioning figured out. You think you have, what you mentioned about the edge and the positioning, which is the most important thing before you start the pod, getting to the title right, because that will affect the SEO, the written assets, everything, right? Getting that strategic part right at the beginning. Do you have a framework for this? Do you have by the way, off camera, do you need time? I say.
No, it's just opening the door because it's getting really hot, but it's fine.
If you want to open it fully, just take your time to do it.
No, we're good. We can continue.
Okay. Okay. So, do you have like a framework, a process, kind of like to approach this? And most importantly, what are the assumptions or things that I guess people take as true and they aren't a lot of times when it comes to, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's going to go in the direction of like, I don't know, they don't know about their customer. They don't know enough about the syntax that the customer uses. They don't know enough about how to position a podcast and how to land ideas too, I think. I don't know. Give me your thoughts on this, because I'm sure you probably have this operationalized at this point with the team and whatnot. So,
yeah, so it seems like when you're creating or doing any B2B marketing, which in my eyes B2B marketing is just creating content for people so that when they come into the buying window, which is 3% of the time for your thing, they know, like, and trust you, so they come right to you. That's like my summary of B2B marketing. And so if we're trying to do that, the key part here is creating information that's going to make them know, like, and trust you. And you can only do that if you understand them, like what keeps them up at night, how they speak to their friends, what their role is, etc. And so we can't do anything until we have a solid understanding of the customer persona. And then once we have that, the process for creating the podcast is just like the process for creating any B2B content. We have to make it specific enough, valuable enough, potentially entertaining and a little bit funny. And then we just have to package it up to get the attention. And so the positioning process we've already been through. Making it valuable and entertaining, it typically is quite hard to do that first time round, but ideally every episode you release, we're trying to get some kind of feedback, whether it's reviews on Apple Podcasts, whether you're speaking to or get feedback from the guest, but also then ideally speaking to listeners to understand. And then packaging it up, this is like copywriting, in my opinion, is like, what's the hook on the LinkedIn post that you use to promote the episode? So those are the things that we work through with the client, right? But most of the time when they come to us, they have that good understanding of the customer persona because they have an established B2B business that has sold stuff before. So then it's just the process of how to create good B2B content. It just happens to be in the format of a podcast.
When you say that sold stuff before, do you mean that has product market fit, or how and if so, in what grade? Because I mean, to me, product market fit is not an absolutist thing, right? It's a sliding scale. If so, how much of product market fit do they need to have in order to start considering this? And do you not take early stage companies because it's not a good fit for you as a company for fame, or because you don't believe it's a good idea to start a podcast if you're in early stage?
My view on when marketing is needed for a B2B company is when we have done a lot of, or when we've proven that we can sell person to person. And so I would start, if I'm starting a B2B company, I'm just going to start with pure outbound. And once that's repeated, only then would I shift to using marketing to try and attract those customers.
Agreed.
Because it's much harder to optimize the one-to-many communication than it is the one-to-one communication. Like the learning period is much faster. So,
and I do believe that it's much harder. It's much easier to learn about people than to extrapolate that and make that a learning about a market, right? Which is why,
yeah. Another way of saying that, if you get more information from seeing someone face-to-face or Zoom call than your LinkedIn Ads Manager. So again, like for fame, a customer that has the more product market fit the customer has, the more valuable they are to us, because there's a chunk of clients that would leave us because their business dies. And so that is obviously lesser risk the more they've sold and the more product market fit they have.
now, but okay, totally agree. That makes a lot of sense. Any other B2B services company, I think, would think the same way, unless they're like in the niche of serving to SMBs or like early stage specifically. Now, for early stage, if just to know your take, because maybe you decided and you tell me, hey, I don't want to talk about how to do a podcast for early stage because it's not my thing, whatever. But how you've seen this being approached properly, and when is that kind of like what is that turning point that makes you, is it 1 million ARR that tells you, hey, we've done enough outbound, now this is working, let's start a podcast and let's do it properly? Have you seen that happen? If so, how? And kind of like a little bit of your thoughts on how to do it in the early stage, and are there better alternatives to get your feet wet into this whole, because at the end of the day, podcast is part of all bound go-to-market playbook in a way, right? So yeah,
I think 1 million AR is about the right point in which to embark upon a podcast. You've proven that you can sell, I don't know, if your ACV is 100K, you've proven you can sell 10 of them, which I think is about right. After just saying that we shouldn't start it until we have a very good idea of our customer persona, the great thing about the show, especially if you're interviewing category 1 guests, I'll explain what this is shortly, is that you're going to learn a lot about the potential customer. And so having your thought leader or your CEO doing that is actually great for the business because they have guaranteed one-on-one time with the ideal customer. So category 1 is the person actually doing the thing. And so in our example of the cybersecurity governance platform, it's that middle manager, compliance manager, e.g. the ideal buyer, the person doing the role in real life. Category 2 is like the author, influencer, consultant. Now, they're not as good for really understanding that person and that role, but they often have a audience of people of category 1 guests, so they can help the show grow. So I find that I learn a lot from my guests. Interesting positioning challenge here actually is that my show used to be Confessions of a B2B Marketer, and that is much better in terms of Fame's customer persona. Because
that's how I knew about it.
Yeah. Exactly. Because the ideal buyer for us is that marketing manager. It's not the founder CEO, because often then their company is too small. I had to reposition because I spent like 8 years in marketing, wasn't actually doing marketing in my day-to-day role. And so I was just not that interested in the conversations. So now our show, it's actually not a great case study for Fame, because now our show, we can reach the ideal customers, we can reach customers, but they're not actually that ideal for us. But I had to do it because otherwise I just couldn't deal with another conversation about like LinkedIn ads or SEO.
Right. That's so interesting. What are some of the business useful learnings that you've made throughout working with so many reputable, let's call it like that, reputable, big Alibaba, Ramp, exactly, like the logos that you've worked with, right? Some business useful learnings from working with them, especially, when it comes to, I think when working with internal teams, you learn a lot about a company's internal structure, and that gets you thinking about how to improve yours, at least in our case, and I'm sure it is in yours, right? So what are some other things that you've seen with, working with your clients that then you implemented or that influenced how you've been running Fame?
Yeah, I think caveat here is I haven't worked directly with clients for like 1 to 2 years, but I do remember one. It was an Indian software company. I won't say the name, but thousands of employees. And it was so interesting because we had the CEO, he was the host. And so the CEO would come to like the odd meeting, and they had their values that were like much less bullshit than Accenture's values. And on the call, the CEO would be referencing the values. Let's say somebody in the team wanted to pitch a guest or like some tweak to the positioning of the show. And he would be like, okay, how does that align with insert value here? And like, so it's really like the weird companies that do this weird stuff, like behave in weird ways, because those are the behaviors that they want their people to work in are the best. So, and I like that company is very successful. The show was good. It hit their goals. So that was one experience where I was like, wow, I want to be more like this company. Other ones, when Fame was smaller and we would work with smaller companies and we're working directly with the CEO of like a 10-person business, it's always the CEOs that had an action bias. This is also one of Fame's values, which is, and you mentioned it earlier, like just doing things and then learning from them. And so I always used to like working with those people more that were more like, we'd make a suggestion, they were like, yeah, let's do it. Or they just improve something without telling us, just like this constant improvement and learning. So that those were my favorite clients. So it's a combination of the bigger companies that it really had the values, like weird values that they actually lived, and then the smaller, more agile owner CEOs.
Interesting. Can I ask you what are some of those weird values at Fame? Because you mentioned there's a line, I don't know where, that you say that you guys have a really weird culture. Why do you say so? Because maybe you tell me about it and I don't think it's weird, right? And maybe most people think so, but why do you say so? And what is that culture?
Yeah, I think they could be weirder. They're less bullshit than Accenture's. The first is client, 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 which basically means that we always try to do the best thing for the client. Within reason, obviously, we're trying to make a profit, but if we do that, then ultimately we'll win in the long term. Next is action bias, like we'd rather just do it and learn from it, which ties nicely into our third value, which is growth obsessed. E.g., we want to improve personally, which would improve our clients' podcasts if we get better at doing stuff, which is going to help them grow their business, which will help grow Fame. Then that feeds back into being able to grow our sales because we have more resources to train people, etc. And finally, operational excellence. We just need this because as a people business, if you're not organized, it just can condense into a complete shit show and then you lose all your clients. So there's the values, like I wouldn't say our values are weird, but we are weird about stuff internally. I probably wish we'd be weirder. More like an example that I always come up with is like most shows where you have something called a master tracker, which is just a Google sheet. But we have this quite lengthy working procedure called the Google Sheet formatting working procedure, where you have like very strict rules on how sheets formatted. And the one that I always catch people out on is that whenever you add a URL into a cell, we have to remove the backslash from the URL. You know what I mean? And so and there's like about 17 rules. So it's quite hard for someone new coming to companies to get them all right, especially if they have a high workload. But the reason for this, I learned this in consulting companies, is that literally half of the value that someone sees in a task that you've done is not the actual work, it's how it's presented. And so you just need, it just has to be perfect, you know? So that's like something that comes under operational excellence. But yeah, I think a big part of the role of the CEO is to define those weird values and get people to behave in alignment.
Totally agreed. Was your kind of like that spine that you had of not going into finance instead of management consulting, that you wish you had that experience instead, what you would have done if you could start over again? Was that what made you, in treating companies as products, an investor in 12 different companies as an angel? And if so, you know, I'm assuming it is, right? But kind of like, I just want to get to know more about your experience as an investor and how has that improved your way of running Fame? Because at the end of the day, if you're analyzing companies as products, then the questions raise themselves, right? You start analyzing your own company as a product as well. And like, would I, and of course, like you need to be able to invest in your own company, right? So yeah, tell me about that. How do you start in the first place? What was your first investment, if you want to tell, without names or whatever, but just your first investment? How did it happen? How you got into this? Yeah.
The angel investing thing was an interesting journey. Started in 2017 because I had some cash and I read a book called Angel by Jason Calacanis about it. And in hindsight, I wish I'd never done it. Invested in 11 companies, £111,000, so an average of 10,000 each. I think it's going to return I'm going to get the 111K back. But over a decade, it means I would have lost like probably 40% if you count inflation. So overall, not something that I would recommend unless you have like over 10 million in net worth, in my opinion. Did I learn stuff? Probably learned a bit. It was probably more ego driven. Like I'm an angel investor, you know. So I haven't done one for like 4 years now, because I have better places to put the cash. But did I learn stuff that helped Fame? I don't think so, because I wasn't the type of investor to like spend hours analyzing. Most of them were my friends' companies that I just relied upon the founder skills and my belief in them, or more it was just like a favor because they needed to raise money. So not something that I recommend, and also not something that I think is going to make me money. In fact, I'm going to be losing money, you know, on that over the decade.
Right. Yeah. Hey, I appreciate that you're honest about it because there's so many, and that you're acknowledging that it was ego driven in a way, right? I want to be an angel investor. There's so many of them, right? And 99% of them won't admit it. And they actually are angel investors for that reason, just to say that they are. And then they're just investing in their friends' companies with no real financial analysis, which is, and it's fine. It's completely fine. But I'm glad that you admitted it because yeah, I was just curious. And yeah, to be honest, I don't have that many more questions, but I think we could be talking about podcasts and go to market and all this type of stuff for many hours. So probably gonna have you back again another time if you want with more deeper questions regarding that. I just wanted to kind of like go through the surface today in a way, and I think we got deep though in many topics.
Yeah, I think we covered the podcast stuff well. Hopefully that will help people if they're considering starting a podcast, especially like the in-house breakdown. I thought that was good. Oh yeah, I'm more than happy to come on. I think something interesting, because I don't actually do the marketing for Fame anymore, but I did do it for 4 years. I think we do it in quite a good way, but maybe we can save that for a future episode.
Okay, let me ask you about that. Then we'll cut this part. I also, because this podcast is about, FounderVideo and whatnot, and you mentioned that you guys didn't grow through video necessarily, but I mean, at the end of the day, your business isn't creating that content, which I'm assuming, I didn't ask you, but I'm assuming that the shows that you do for your clients all are on video too, right? Like they're
like 80%, yeah.
Okay. And so what were the levers for for Fame's go to market to be successful and to get those millions in ARR and was it about the case studies, was it about the logos, was it about the marketing, was it about the team posting content? I don't know how have you guys grown the most? I want to get some insight into that.
So to zoom out to the business strategy, our strategy is our fundamental belief is that retention is the foundation of growth. And so we want to optimize everything for retaining clients. And so this actually the flywheel starts by acquiring clients cheaply. If we spend a shitload of money on ads, we have to raise prices, which is going to impact retention. So first we acquire clients cheaply, and we'll get back around to that. I'll explain how we do that shortly. So the flywheel goes, we acquire clients cheaply, which then means we have to hire values-aligned team members or really good values-aligned team members. And if we do that, our service is going to improve. If the service improves, we're going to make the clients happy. If we make the clients happy, we're going to get word of mouth, we're going to get virality, and we're going to get case studies and referrals. And then that enables us to acquire clients cheaply. And so then the flywheel goes around. So that's like the context for our go-to-market. And so then we have to work out how we're going to get a load of clients without spending a shitload on ads. I think we were quite lucky in that when we started Fame in 2019, there wasn't that many podcast agencies, yet there was some search volume. And so if you search podcast agency or B2B podcast agency, we've pretty much always ranked for those terms, both paid and organic. And so that has enabled us, because there's already demand. We didn't choose to start a completely new business that people weren't searching for. So there's already demand. We just have to get there. And so we just have to pay to create content or to run ads to get there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, again, it's cheap for us because I've spent a decade learning about B2B marketing. And actually only really kicked off in year 4 of the business is when I was able to grow a relatively big LinkedIn audience. And then also had my podcast, which benefited from that LinkedIn audience. And so we didn't have to spend a shitload on content because I'd spent a decade learning about it. And so I just created all the content. So I think that's another way that's enabled us to acquire clients cheaply. And the third one I'll share is something that I like to call service-led growth, which is very well known in the product space, PLG, where you basically, as a user uses your product, they expose it to other potential users. And so we have that, but we're not a product, we're a service. And so some of the ways we have that is that we built the podcast hosting software that our client would embed the player onto their site. It has the Fame logo, has the link back to Fame's site. So it helps with SEO. It also helps with branding. So basically focusing on catching demand, not creating demand, catching it mainly through Google, leveraging my decade of expertise to create content cheaply, and then using service-led growth to ideally get the average client to bring us maybe, 0.2 clients or something through those strategies.
Okay, final question to wrap up. This was a really great breakdown. service-led growth. I love this concept. I didn't think of it like with those two words, but I always thought of POG as the motion that every service company should do, like, and the product being the service, right? Because and as you said, retention is the growth of engine, right? It's really great breakdown. But now I want you, like, I want to ask you, so first off, you agree with the fact what I said before, right? The fact that services and product companies are becoming more and more similar thanks to AI on both ways. What is your take on that?
Yeah, like I've always thought that it's exactly the same thing. It's just either humans doing the work or microchips doing the work. Like that's the difference between a SaaS and a service company. And so since day one, we've used like quite basic automation actually, but it basically meant that we leverage that to replace, I don't know, 2 people that were in the Philippines that now like Zapier does their job, you know? And then 2 years ago, we started using AI a lot more to remove more human labor and spend more money on microchips. So it's really how much of your cost basis is on people versus AWS or OpenAI, I think is what you should optimize for.
Totally. And at this point, my take is that both in product and services, if run well, the split should be about the same at this point. It's not that different.
Exactly. I think if had to be like, I think between 10 and 20% of the revenue services, maybe more. So it's just a spectrum of humans to microchips.
Right. No, totally. Curious, what have been the best use cases for AI or the most impactful ones since you've been implementing it in the past 2 years?
The classic and most obvious is converting the long form audio into written assets. It's actually come a long way in the past year and a half. Claude specifically is the one that can, if you feed it all, like
we use it as well, yeah.
It's exactly like the source of, like if you want to be written by the host.
You can create those projects, things that have the context window always, and it's really cool. Yeah.
And then the other nice example is that we can ask when a guest comes on the show, we can ask them what they like to talk about, feed that into AI to feed into what we call the interview sheet, which is the thing you shared with me today or yesterday. And then another nice one is for the clips, like selecting the potential clips and then also selecting potential B-roll for the clips we use, and then also giving the video editor more context. They can't be an expert on the topic, so we can take the transcript of the clip that they're creating and then write out bullets giving background on that. So the video editor has more context when they create the clip is another example.
Interesting. Do you let AI do the initial cutting or not?
No, we have people doing it at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, same. Interesting. Well, you have a hard stop, I'm assuming, right? Or not?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll have you back at some point. I think this been a really, really useful episode. Thank you for coming. And do you want to promote anything right now? I mean, you have Fame going on and you're looking to scale it. We didn't talk about the vision and future plans, but I guess that's for the second episode if you want. Or
Fame SO is where it's like the whole, like all of my efforts going to that. And then feel free to connect or DM me on LinkedIn. It's Tom Hunt.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. We'll stay in touch. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to the FounderVideo podcast with Will Martin, and we'll see you on the next episode.